Everyone, welcome to one more video of Adobe Stager. Adobe Stager is a part of the 3D Substance suite that was unveiled by Adobe recently. And what I'd like to do in this video is explore the full potential of this particular application, even though its intention is only to stage particular single objects. I think there's so much more behind it, and lots of different industries can really benefit from it. Adobe Stager is a professional scene design and rendering application. And what I love most about it is that you can combine both 3D models and 2D images to create these really awesome photorealistic and high quality imagery. So we know that it has been transformative for many different industries, everything from construction and architecture, fashion, of course, healthcare, advertising. Lots of different industries have benefited from the 3D world. What I love most about Adobe Stager is that you can really dive into something simple and something straightforward, such as these two particular bags, and take that particular skill into something a little bit more complex, such as a combination of multiple different 3D objects, and dive into something far more complex, such as the creation of, let's say, a 3D scene. Let's say we're modeling a kitchen today. So the transition from fashion to interior design to lots of other industries seems really appealing to me. I think Adobe Substance in general, it gives all of the applications, even though we're going to focus on Stager today, all of the applications can give users access to a collection of tools and content to create and capture, as well as to compose and render a lot of these 3D scenes. I think the learning curve is really remarkably gentle, I should say. It's really quick to set up the materials and the textures and apply them onto the 3D models, change anything along the way to really achieve these great results without too much difficulty. As Adobe famously states, the 3D generation is here, and Adobe Substance 3D can bring you their ecosystem of apps and content that can empower lots of different design features. So let's go ahead and review a little bit about Adobe Stager and how it functions and how you're able to essentially use it by looking into the different workspaces. So you have the home page, which essentially when you click on it, it brings you back to the home page, and you're able to switch between different projects you're working on. The design page, which is this one right here, and you're able to see what you're currently working on. And then of course you have the render page. The render page is just as any other application that you may have been working on previously, which allows you to essentially export a high quality image and send it on to your clients or whoever you are doing this particular project for. Now, I should mention that even though you're able to add multiple different settings and apply, different resolutions, different presets, you can also essentially export into PSD if you're currently, if you're looking into advancing your project into Photoshop, your two-dimensional image that you can share with a lot of your clients. You're also able to export and publish a 3D scene, which is really cool, because when you do that, you essentially allow your clients to, you send them a link, and they are able to essentially review the scene kind of like in a similar, well, it's good to save from time to time. And I need to mention that if you don't save, Adobe Stager has, in general, all of the apps within Adobe Substance have an amazing autosave feature, where if you work a little bit too long and you kind of forget to save, it autosaves for you, and I absolutely love this. Alright, so it took a second to save the scene. I'd say enough time to go get a cup of coffee and come back, or make one. But you'd rather have the autosave options that this particular application have than work on something for days and then just lose it in a span of seconds. Anyhow, so Let's continue with the rest of the overview. So as I mentioned already, those are your workspaces, the design and the render mode. This particular area right here is called the toolbar section. The toolbar section will give you different ways to interact with the content. Lots of similar things as the rest of the Adobe Creative Cloud, if you're familiar with it. So the magic wand, you have something called a sampler, we'll talk about that. You are able to work on basic shapes from here. This is your environment lighting, which is really, really important. And then you have the three basic areas to essentially rotate. You have the orbit, you have the pan, and then you have the dolly. The best way to remember them is 1, 2, and 3. So if you hold 1, 2, or 3 on your keyboard, you are able to essentially rotate like this and check out your scene. Allows you to move left, right, up, down, move around the scene and see it from different angles, snap different angles, which is again really important. So if you have to memorize anything, and you know, I'm not saying you should try to memorize things, I'm not the greatest at that either, but 1, 2, 3, not too difficult. 1, 2, 3 on your keyboard, and that allows you to move. Now the viewport is also really important, because the viewport is the section right here and allows you to save different cameras, add cameras, work on frame selection, and allow you to click on ray tracing. Ray tracing, basically what it does is it'll take a second to, you know, essentially happen, but as soon as you turn it on, it gives you a preview of what the material selection looks like and what the scene will look like once it's being rendered. I will usually turn off my ray tracing because it's a lot slower to work and add textures and materials and 3D models once ray tracing is on. Okay, and the last thing I'd like to mention are the document panels. The document panels, which are located right here. Actually, you have them right there in the left hand side at the very bottom of it. You're able to check out your project materials and everything that you've applied so far. And then the last thing is the scene. The scene is really important, and eventually once you build something a little more complex, like how I have it right here, which is, you know, not just let's go ahead and work on this one chair and stage it and prototype it. I have a whole scene going on in here, so eventually you might want to start renaming your things. Well, cube 35, that's essentially the left side wall. Cube 8 might be the right side wall, and so on and so forth. So it might be, you know, helpful to say this is wall number 1, wall number 2, I don't know. It is helpful though. And then right here in the properties section, every single time you interact, and I'm gonna take my selection tool right here just so you guys can see. Let's say I'm gonna go ahead and interact with this particular chair in here. So once I select my chair, it'll find it for me. As you can see, I have not been renaming anything. I probably should, but anyhow, so I'm selecting my chair right here, and I'm given 2 different options. I can transform the chair, which means you can see right here you have the X, Y, and Z scale, rotation, and positions. And what that allows me to do is to make it bigger, you know, make it smaller. You can use the little circles right here, and you'll see that it's a little difficult sometimes to know which ones are you selecting. So just pay attention to what fills in the color. So for example, right now I'm rotating Z, and you can see that the circle right here, the blue circle, will fill in, and that'll make the chair go in a certain direction. Turned off collision for this particular object. It is inside of the table right here, but if I go into the middle right here, it'll move aligned based on the surface. So it'll basically recognize that the chair is inside of the table, and what that'll do is you see how it goes up and down, so it'll recognize the objects around it and it'll move accordingly, which means that collision is turned on. The software is aware that this particular chair cannot be merged into the table. So the last thing we're going to go ahead and overview are the 3D fundamentals. The 3D fundamentals are basically the models, the materials, the lights, the cameras, rendering, and ray tracing. What this does, it essentially allows us to, so the models, let's say for example this chair that I was just playing around with, this is a 3D model. It allows us to see the 3D form. So the material on this particular chair, if I were to double click on it, I'll get a whole section of a material open up, and I'll see that it's made of polyester structured double weave material. I'm able to click right here on the picture, and what it'll do essentially is it'll open up additional transformation sections. I can change the resolution of this material. Once I export it, it'll look better. I can change the color. This can be a yellow chair. It doesn't have to be beige, right? So I have selected it that once I apply one change to one of the chairs, it'll transform the rest of the chairs too. And I did that by just simply holding shift and selecting all of the chairs. I'm gonna go ahead and undo that. I prefer to stay with this beige color. So again, that is the 3D model that represents the 3D form. The polyester structured double weave would be the changed appearance of this particular 3D form, essentially the material on it. The lights that I currently have in here, which are also available right here for every single object, but are also listed at the very top into the environment section of the scene, and also individually into the light section, the physical light section in here. You can apply whichever light you like. The best way to apply them is drag and drop. Now, what we're gonna do next is we're gonna try to set up the scene and design it whichever way you'd like to. This was something I was working on for a client, so there's weird walls and all that kind of stuff. Alright, so we're gonna go ahead and get started with a new scene. By the way, I don't know if you guys noticed, but it took me only 2 months to actually post this. And in the meantime, like I said before, the 3D world is constantly innovating, which means that Adobe Substance, in particular Stager here, added a whole new feature which is called Timeline. And it's really cool because it records every single part of the step or the process that you are building. So really helpful, especially for all of you who are working closely with clients and they want to see how the process comes together, or how the object and the 3D model will come into position. So anyhow, like I said, constantly being innovated. So a whole new feature added right down here. I mean, if it bothers you, you can always turn it down, but I kind of like it, so I'm gonna keep it on so you guys can see how it interacts. So with that particular kitchen that we were working on, the first thing we're gonna do is set up a plane. The plane is essentially the ground, the foundation. We do that just by simply clicking on it, and if you have particular dimensions like the width, the length, any kind of radius or sides, feel free to add those dimensions in here. I would always recommend working with these dimensions to make sure that you're always proportionate. Okay, so I have my plane set up in here. Like I said, we're only focusing on how do we build all of these 3D assets and this particular scene, so I'm not gonna pay too much attention to my dimensions in here, but you definitely should. The next thing I'm going to do in here is I'm going to start setting up the walls. So for the beginning, I will simply go ahead and use the basic shapes in here: the plane, the cone, the cylinder, the cube. I haven't had to use the sphere yet, but another cool feature if you'd like to use it. You see how the shapes are turning, right? So depending on what you would like to select, which way you would like to rotate, the circle or the square or the pointy arrow will essentially fill in with color. Gonna undo all of that. Instead of making the other side of the wall before I add a window, I'm just gonna go ahead and Command-C, Command-V, or copy and paste this particular side of the wall and just drag it out on the other side. Remember 1, 2, and 3 so that you can see how accurate you are in your placements. As you can see in here, I'm not doing a very good job, so I'm gonna go ahead and select my selection tool and correct. Okay, and then continuing on to your models, you already have some preloaded models in here. So you've got like lots of cool things in here. You can always go to the Adobe 3D Assets webpage and download certain assets, 3D assets that have already been created for you that you're able to use. Some of them are free, some of them you have to pay for. But in our next few videos, we're actually going to go into Sampler and create our own 3D models. So you might even be able to do that part for yourself as well, which is really cool. So you can also type in here and see and search for certain 3D assets and see what's already available. I typed in window and this is what came up, this 3-side window in here. If I were to drag and drop it in here, you'll see that the windows kind of show up as a one little window like this. You can add multiple, you can deconstruct it whichever way you see fit. I think this will do for me. But if you'd like to create your own window or download a particular one, you can do that as well. Here is the page, substance3d.adobe.com. This is where I search for the models that I sometimes need. A lot of the times I'll just make them myself, but sometimes I just need something quick, and it's just really easy to find it here. Let's say we're looking for a window frame. You can just type in window and lots of different options will come up that you're welcome to use. Of course, you don't have to use the assets that I was using in the video. Like if you like this particular medieval arched window, you should totally go for it and use something more fun than what I'm recommending, but this is just as an example. Of course, you can go into all of your assets in here and see what else Adobe is offering for you. There's lots of cool forms. You don't have to use let's say hardwood floors like how I'm using into the video. You can use maybe cement, you could use concrete, you could use different marble tiles. I mean, whatever you would like, obviously. Make it your own scene. And then keep in mind that you also have limited downloads with your subscription, with how much you're allowed to download from the assets library, which is why it becomes really essential that eventually we learn how to make our own 3D assets and models and materials, of course. So yeah, here are your material sections. You have surfaces, you have atlases, you have decals, you have lots of models. I don't know what you would like to be making, but let's go ahead and go into furniture, and you can see lots of cool stuff added. Like obviously when I was making this scene 2-3 months ago, a lot of these were not available, so I had to make a lot of my own. So that can also be time consuming, but like I said, 3D world is growing constantly. So anyhow, you can go ahead and download what you're looking for. So let's say, let's see, what do I like in here? Let's just say I like this table. Okay, maybe this one. I'm gonna go ahead and download it. Okay, so after you have downloaded that table, you can go ahead and upload it into your libraries. A lot of the times they just sync in, but I'm having some issues. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm just gonna drag and drop, and you can create your own new library. Like I have my own libraries right here, and then collect all of your assets in that particular section. So again, we're only talking about a dragging and dropping. Okay, so here is my file. I'm just gonna go ahead and drag and drop. I'm gonna select the interior design folder in here, and I'm just gonna drop it in there. It'll say one element is being added. So now if I go into my interior design, I'll see that it is listed right here. So I can click and place into my scene. Now it'll ask you if you'd like to include the unused materials or if you'd like to generate the UVs. I usually just turn off the unused materials and I import with UV S for the models. I'm gonna go ahead and take my selection tool and just scale it down a little bit. This is what it looks like. Again, remember that if you hold command, you are able to separate things. So like, let's say maybe I don't really want the circle, maybe I'd like it to be round, or sorry, maybe I'd like it to be a different shape that is round. But anyhow, I can go ahead and delete that, and I can go into my starter assets and I can create something else. Maybe I want it to be, I don't know, square. So I'm gonna go ahead and hold shift, scale down, something like that, and take it all the way up and now I have a different top. So if I wanted to test out how it would look like in the scene, remember you can go ahead and double click on it here in the materials in my assets section. I'm going to go ahead and click on that and see what is already available. As you can see in here, there are some things that are already preloaded for you. Let's go ahead and I'm going to take this oak wood and place it onto my object in here, and I'll see what it looks like. It's a little too large for the scale. It doesn't look very realistic, so I'm going to go ahead and right here where it says repeat. And by the way, if the transform option doesn't show up, just double click on the 3D object and it'll show up. So I'm going to go ahead and increase that to maybe 2. Okay, so now the pattern is showing up a little bit more, and I'm starting to like it a little bit more. So by the way, into the object section, I don't really like these super sharp edges. So what I can do is, I can try to find a way to turn on the bevel in here. And what the bevel is going to do is going to, round up the edges for me a little bit. Obviously, you can play around with the radius and the sides and how much of a bevel you would like it to have, but this kind of works for me, so I'm just going to leave it at that. The next thing I'm going to have you guys do is try to apply materials to all of your 3D assets. So for example, the legs right here on this little table that I downloaded, and I'm going to try to find something that looks like metal, or I don't know, maybe like this one right here. This is metal brushed. I also have hammered metal, so I'll test them both out and see which one I like the most. I'm gonna click away here on the side. I will zoom in a little bit. I think I'm gonna increase the repetition in here to like also a 2, so that it is a little bit more put together, a little more condensed. And if you're having a hard time seeing it, turn on ray tracing. See what it's starting to shape, what it's starting to look like. And it's gonna take a second to load, but you'll be interacting well with the screen. It just takes a second. Give it a moment, it'll load, and you'll be able to see everything. By the way, notice how the table, since we removed the round top, notice how it just now is on its own. So the cube that we replaced instead of the round table right here that we added is actually outside of the folder. So what we can do is we can go ahead and rename it, and we can call it table number 1. We can actually drag and drop and put it into that folder, so that now when we work on the table and we want to move it around or make it bigger or smaller, it kind of goes together. So here's my floor right here. This is where I like to just start applying materials, just so I can see it all come together and decide if I need more windows, if I need more doors, or I don't know, walls, or whatever aesthetics. So in here in the plane, as you can see, my default material is that right there. So I'm going to go back to my material section in here, or remember this page right here. So we can always go back in here and we can choose a different surface. Let's say wood. There's so many cool options in here. If you like something, go ahead and download it and import it into your scene. So I don't really like any of these options in here, so I'm going to go ahead and go into my own library section in here. I'm going to click the return button so I can find my folder that I created with wood in here, and you can see that I've got some options in here. Let's try this mahogany wood and see how it's looking like as a hardwood floor. So it's just gonna take a second to apply. If it doesn't, click and drag. It's way too big, so obviously the repetition would need to go up to maybe like a 4 or even more. Maybe like a 5. Okay, so feel free to adjust all of that. By the way, like I said, you don't like something, you can change the color, you can change the resolution, the presets, so many options. Play around with this, see what all is available to you. If you want to see it come together, again, turn on ray tracing, see what you're working with. I'm gonna go ahead and zoom in a little bit here and let it load so I can see what I'm working on. So as you can see in this scene here, I've slowly been adding a lot of different elements in here, and it's starting to look a little bit more realistic. Some of these elements, they're pretty easy to add and create yourself. I use the starter assets for a lot of these. The cabinets are not difficult to create. I used the cube for a lot of them and downloaded the handles from the Substance 3D Assets library. All of these other elements in here, for example, the toaster or the oven, the kettle, those are all elements that I actually downloaded. I use the Substance 3D Assets library to search for them. So I, for example, would search for the fridge. I'm pretty sure this is the one. Yep, this is the one that I used. I didn't really feel like making a stove, so I also searched for the stove. I chose one of these. I think it was this one that I chose. So little details like that. Even though I made the chairs, you could also search for chairs. And you can find something that you like, and you can of course modify it. I almost always modify the 3D models just because I want to make it my own into the scene. I don't always want to use the design as it is given to me. So feel free to be creative with that. So here's the fridge. I'm just gonna go ahead and click and drag and drop it right here. I leave this as default, and I'm gonna go ahead and import. If your scene ever becomes or starts to look like this and you can't really see your arrows, don't forget to click on the arrow and they'll show up. This is usually scale Y to size it down a little bit. As you can see, the fridge was just a little bit too big. And usually what I do is, as I import one element at a time, I usually like to apply those materials right away. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this, and I'm going to go back to my starter assets, and I'll look for that metallic color that this fridge is probably going to have. So maybe like something like that. By the way, if you click and drag and drop the metallic color, kind of how I have it right here, it'll apply to the whole element, okay? However, if you want to only apply, let's say, the metallic color on one side of the fridge, but then maybe a different kind of element on the other side of the fridge, just go ahead and undo that. And right here in the folder of the 3D asset, go ahead and click and drop down just so that you can see which one is the parent and which one is the child. So in the select section right here, you can select the parent. It'll select the whole folder, or you can select the child, which is the subfolder right here. You can also keep expanding the folders to see the different elements that are embedded into into the 3D model. As you can see, this one is pretty complex, so you can custom pretty much everything in here, or you can delete certain things. So for example, let's see, this is the fridge, this is the door. So I don't know, let's say you want to create your own door or something like that. Remember, you can select it and then just backspace or delete, and you can delete it, and you can see the inside of the fridge now. You can create your own door. Maybe you don't like the handle, I don't know, whatever that might be. Remember that you can go ahead and pretty much, customize it as you see fit. Okay, so now that I have applied the desired changes for the fridge, I'm going to go ahead and take my selection tool again, select the fridge, and use my centerpiece or the collision and move it all the way back to where the wall is. I was hoping it would stay somewhere right there. Okay, that looks about right. Okay, so those are the cabinets that I used. Like I said before, a lot of the 3D assets will come with detachable pieces. So for example, you don't like the handles, like I didn't like the handles that came with the cabinet door, so I deleted those and I created my own handles. I'm holding Command, and all I'm doing is dragging and deleting certain elements so I can see the inside. This is what the inside of the cabinet looks like. It's pretty standard. Remember, if you hold Command, you can also select a certain portion. You don't always have to delete it. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and say these doors in the top are going to be made of a different material, this terrazzo maybe, and then the rest of it is going to be made of wood. So if you make a mistake, Command Z or undo. So I made a mistake in here. I wasn't really selecting the door. I was kind of selecting the whole object. So here is the door. It's outlined for me already. I can see that. I'm going to go ahead and choose this other material just to show you how you can change things. And remember, you can always use the Magic Wand tool to select similar surface areas. So if you didn't want to change each individual door, you can go ahead and use the Magic Wand tool and click on all of the doors in here, hold shift so it selects them all like so. You get that immediate change on all of your selections. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stay with my wood color in here for all of my cabinets, and I'm gonna go ahead and position this cabinet on top of the fridge by using the rotations right here. Okay, so I'm gonna zoom out, see my full scene in place. You can add the walls later. You can work with the plane and the back side first, arrange everything as you see fit, and then add these little details and elements later. It'll be easier to see the scene and rotate around it. When you put a bunch of walls and different things, it becomes a little more challenging to turn around. So you can leave the walls and everything for kind of later. And then another cool thing that I want to mention is this is a new feature. You can also work with a timeline. Like I said, maybe you just only want to feature one particular chair. You can create an animation for that and show that to your client how it fits into the process. It is a little more interactive with individuals that work outside of this space. Okay, so the last few things I wanted to go over are the environment lighting. The environment lighting is really important. Right here in the scene section, you'll see that you have essentially 3 different types of lighting effects. You have the ground lighting, you have the background lighting, and then of course you have the lights that can be added from the assets section right here. So you can apply whichever lighting effect you see fit, and simply working with the intensity of the lighting, you'll see that you can exhibit a really cool scene that is brighter or a little bit darker. The rotation of the lighting is also really important. You can also achieve the same thing right here from the toolbar section. You see this little area that says environmental lighting. You can do that. I like to use this one because it's a bit easier to maneuver, because you can kind of go in a 360 rotation, and you can see how the shadows will affect the space. So whichever area you'd have more light coming in versus the area that you'd have less light coming in. So this is really cool. Definitely experiment with that. Also, please remember that I have a beginner's video as well, where I do go over a lot of these basic fundamental elements in Adobe Stager. So maybe you should watch that video as well before you dive into this one. If something seems a little bit out of place or if it's not clear, do remember to watch that. Alright, and last but not least is our render settings. So if you're done with your scene, you can go back to your render settings as I mentioned earlier. Choose which scene you'd like to render, the real time or the ray tracing. Ray tracing is obviously going to be a little bit better. If your computer is enabled for CPU rendering, do select that. It is going to be a lot faster. Unfortunately, my laptop is not eligible for this feature, so I don't have that availability. With the preset, you don't have to individually select all of the settings. You can just select whether you want it to be a draft, a medium, high, ultra, custom. I usually leave mine as high. And if you'd like to, by the way, have a maximum time that Stager is allowed to render your scene, do apply that. So a lot of the times I work with very tight deadlines, and I only have, let's say, 3 hours or 2 hours or 50 minutes to get a specific scene in place. So I'm just gonna go ahead and type in, let's say, 50 minutes in here, and so whatever Stager can do in 50 minutes, that is going to be the scene, because you don't want, and then of course the format you'd like to export your scene as. So for me right now, I only want a PNG, so you can always go ahead and select PSD or PNG and then just go ahead and click render. Alright, thank you everyone for watching. Hopefully this was helpful. Next we'll be moving into Adobe Simpler and Designer.